Over the last few years, law enforcement agencies across the United States began noticing a pattern that felt unusual and worrying. Drug seizures were rising, operations were becoming more organized, and the networks looked more active than before. But the people behind these activities were not the typical cartel members that investigators expected. They were not high-profile figures sneaking across the border, nor were they individuals with long criminal records. Instead, they were local U.S. citizens, living normal-looking lives and blending perfectly into American neighborhoods. Some of them lived in quiet suburbs, working regular 9-to-5 jobs. Others owned small businesses, did delivery work, or stayed under the radar by keeping low-income lifestyles. Many had no serious criminal background at all before they became involved. Yet, despite their normal appearance, they were secretly connected to two of the most powerful criminal organizations in the world, the Sinaloa Cartel and Jalisco New Generation Cartel, CJNG. These American operatives had one main responsibility: to quietly expand the drug distribution network inside the United States without attracting attention. Their job was strategic. Instead of moving across borders or carrying out high-risk missions, they handled the U.S. side logistics, receiving shipments, storing them, transporting them, and delivering them to local dealers across different states. Because they were American citizens, they didn't raise suspicion the same way foreign operatives might have. This gave them an advantage that law enforcement didn't fully grasp at first. For a long time, this strategy worked smoothly. These groups used small storage units, short-term rental homes, and ordinary vehicles like pickup trucks and minivans to move drugs from one state to another. They often used rental cars, so their personal vehicles wouldn't be connected to operations. Some even used rideshare apps and shipping services to move small packages without making anything look suspicious. But as their influence grew, so did the internal problems and risks. In Texas, one of the first major warning signs appeared. A small crew that had been handling local distribution started arguing over money. Disagreements turned into heated conflicts, and soon local criminals tried to rob them. This attracted attention from police. During the investigation, officers found evidence linking the crew to kidnappings, intimidation incidents, and multiple threats. These were not large-scale violent attacks, but they were serious enough for authorities to label the cell as extremely dangerous. As investigators looked deeper, they discovered similar activity emerging in other states. The pattern was the same in Georgia, Ohio, California, Nevada, and Virginia. Everywhere they looked, the story repeated. People who looked like ordinary Americans were quietly working as distributors, runners, and local coordinators for the Sinaloa Cartel and CJNG. These individuals were not trained cartel soldiers. They were not heavily armed hitmen or professional criminals. They were simply operatives, people who had been recruited for money, opportunity, or out of desperation. Yet their presence inside the U.S. was expanding much faster than anyone expected. Federal agents started noticing that the cells were small but highly connected. One cell in Georgia might unknowingly depend on a courier in California. A storage house in Ohio might be receiving shipments linked to distributors in Nevada. These networks were like puzzle pieces that did not seem connected at first, but once investigators placed the pieces together, the bigger picture became impossible to ignore. A major break came when investigators tracked communications from Phoenix, Arizona. A young man who worked as a part-time mechanic was actually a courier delivering drug shipments every weekend. On the surface, he looked like a regular, hard-working American. But behind the scenes, he was making long multi-state trips for cartel-linked cells. Agents followed him quietly, monitoring his routine. For weeks, everything looked normal. But during one trip, he met two individuals outside an abandoned warehouse in Nevada. The warehouse had been empty for years, yet signs of recent activity were found. Temporary bedding, packaging materials, and chemical substances used to mask drug scents. It turned out to be a small but active distribution, hub-run entirely by U.S.-based operatives. This discovery opened a door. Agents realized that the cartels were not sending large teams into the U.S. Instead, they were recruiting Americans to establish local networks and handle storage, transportation, and collection work. And because these operatives lived in the U.S., They had the freedom to move between states without drawing attention. These groups became unpredictable. They did not follow strict criminal codes like major cartel members. Many acted emotionally, made mistakes, or used threats without thinking about consequences. This made them dangerous, not because of large-scale operations, but because of their instability. One cell in the Midwest ended up kidnapping a dealer who owed them money. Their actions were sloppy, which exposed their entire network and eventually led to multiple arrests. This type of careless behavior kept happening in different states, giving law enforcement more clues. By 2024, surveillance operations across the country were quietly running. Phone intercepts, undercover agents, and movement tracking were all pointing toward one conclusion. Cartel-linked U.S. cells were becoming more active and needed to be dismantled before they expanded further. The turning point came in Virginia, where two key operatives, one linked to Sinaloa and the other to CGNG, planned a secret meeting at an old private property. Agents had already been monitoring them for months. The meeting was supposed to be about a major shipment. Federal teams moved into position. Hidden cameras, drones, and vehicles were placed around the property. When both operatives arrived, the teams executed a calm, precise operation. No chaos, no dramatic chase, just a quiet, controlled takedown. Their arrests led to a chain reaction. Over the following weeks, more operatives across different states were arrested. Cars, homes, storage units, and apartments were searched. Cash, drugs, ledgers, and communication devices were seized. The investigation revealed a clear story. These were not masterminds, but middle-level American operatives supporting larger international networks. Their downfall disrupted the cartel's U.S. operations and showed authorities exactly how these groups were spreading inside the country. Today, agencies remain cautious and prepared, knowing that stopping small cells early is a key to preventing bigger threats in the future. The turning point in the entire investigation appeared almost by accident. For months, law enforcement analysts have been studying communication patterns from different regions across the United States. Each small group or cell looked independent at first. They operated in different states, used different people, and had no direct connection that could be easily traced. But as digital experts dug deeper, they noticed a very subtle pattern, one that almost went unnoticed. Several small U.S.-based cells, scattered across different cities, were unknowingly linked to the same courier chain. This meant that while the groups believed they were independent, many of them depended on the same delivery person or transportation route. It was a rare opportunity. If investigators could track just one courier, they could potentially follow the path to multiple hidden cells, exposing the network piece by piece. The first promising lead came from Phoenix, Arizona. A young man in his 20s worked as a part-time mechanic at a local shop. To his neighbors and co-workers, he seemed like a normal, hard-working American who spent his weekends with friends and family. But what no one knew was that his weekends were also being used for something far more serious: transporting illegal packages across state lines. The man drove an old, slightly worn-out pickup truck. Nothing fancy, nothing suspicious. His delivery pattern was consistent and carefully structured. Phoenix to Las Vegas, and from Las Vegas into areas of California. Week after week, month after month, the same route played out. Because he looked ordinary and stayed quiet, he managed to avoid raising suspicion for a long time. But once investigators realized he might be part of the shared courier chain, they focused their attention on him. Agents quietly placed a tracker on one of the vehicles connected to his movements. Now, instead of relying only on surveillance teams, they had real-time data showing exactly where he went. For several weeks, nothing unusual happened. The courier went to work every morning, clocked in his hours, visited grocery stores, and returned home like any regular person. His weekend road trips also seemed normal from the outside. Investigators knew they had to remain patient, because sometimes the smallest change in routine could reveal the biggest lead. Then finally, after weeks of slow and uneventful movements, something different happened. During one of his weekend trips, the courier drove off his usual route and stopped at a closed warehouse in Nevada. The building looked abandoned, with faded paint and boarded-up windows. Official records showed that it had been empty for nearly 3 years. There was no business activity reported, no employees, and no reason for anyone to be there. Agents watched from a distance as the courier parked and met two men outside the structure. The exchange was brief but suspicious. The agents didn't approach immediately. They waited for the courier and the two men to leave, then moved in for a closer look. Inside the warehouse, the situation became clearer. They found temporary sleeping areas, piles of discarded packaging, and chemical traces used to hide drug scents from detection. This was not a hideout. It was a fully functional distribution hub. Even more surprising was the fact that this hub wasn't run by foreign cartel members. It was operated entirely by U.S.-based individuals, people who lived and worked locally but received instructions directly from handlers in Mexico. The discovery showed how deeply the network had spread inside the country. This revelation sent alarms across multiple federal agencies. It proved that the cartels had quietly built a multi-state distribution system using Americans who blended into normal communities. These operatives coordinated shipments, collected payments, managed local disputes, and served as an internal branch of much larger foreign organizations. But there was another major problem. These local operatives were often unpredictable. Unlike trained cartel members who followed strict orders and avoided unnecessary risks, many U.S.-based operatives reacted emotionally, made impulsive decisions, and sometimes used violence without thinking about consequences. This made them extremely dangerous, not because they controlled large territories, but because their behavior was unstable and difficult to predict. News reports eventually labeled these small groups extremely violent, not because they carried out major attacks, but because their reactions were reckless. When deals went wrong, they panicked. When someone owed them money, they didn't follow organized protocols. They often acted without planning, and their mistakes repeatedly exposed their entire networks. One notable example came from the Midwest. Two small-scale distributors kidnapped a local dealer who owed them money. Their plan was unprofessional and sloppy. They acted out of fear and emotion rather than strategy. Instead of helping them solve their problem, the kidnapping exposed their operation. Within days, the entire cell was discovered and dismantled. Patterns like these started appearing across multiple states. Investigators realized they weren't dealing with a single large organization. Instead, they were facing dozens of smaller groups loosely connected through communication lines, shared couriers, and indirect instructions from foreign handlers. Every time a cell was taken down, agents found clues that pointed to another one. Small mistakes, careless movements, rushed decisions, or personal conflicts kept revealing bigger pieces of the puzzle. By the end of 2024, pressure was rising across the entire network. Surveillance teams were tracking more devices. Phone intercepts were picking up new names. Undercover agents had gained access to certain circles. The investigation was moving faster than ever before. Each piece of information was pointing in the same direction. Something big was on the horizon. It felt like the entire network was shifting, preparing, or reacting to pressure. Agents sensed that a major opportunity was coming, one that could expose even more of the hidden cells operating quietly across America. The foundation had been laid. The picture was finally becoming clear, and investigators knew the next chapter would be the most critical of all. The final stage of the investigation began quietly, almost without warning. After months of monitoring phones, tracking vehicles, studying communication patterns, and following countless small leads, agents finally received the information they had been waiting for. Someone had tipped off authorities about a planned meeting on the outskirts of Virginia, a meeting between two key U.S.-based cartel-linked operatives. One was connected to the Sinaloa network, and the other had ties to CJNG. The exact purpose of this meeting was still unclear. Investigators suspected it might be connected to an incoming shipment that several agents had been tracking for weeks. But even if it wasn't, the presence of both men at the same location was unusual enough to act on. Normally, the two groups operated separately. For them to meet in person meant something important was being discussed. The location itself added to the mystery. It was an abandoned private property deep in the countryside, surrounded by thick woods. Only a single dirt road led into the area, and there were no nearby houses or businesses. It was the kind of place where no one would expect visitors, a place where people could meet without being interrupted. But what the operatives didn't realize was that locations like this were perfect for something else too: surveillance. Long before the operatives arrived, federal agents had already been preparing. They had surveyed the land during the night, set up cameras hidden in trees, placed long-range microphones behind brush, and positioned drones high enough in the sky that they blended in with the clouds. Every angle was covered. Every possible escape route had been monitored. The property was isolated, but now was quietly surrounded. When the day of the meeting finally arrived, the operation went into full motion. The first man arrived in a silver sedan with dark, tinted windows. He drove slowly, checking his surroundings, a sign that he was cautious but unaware of how closely he was being watched. The second operative arrived about 10 minutes later in a rented SUV. He stepped out wearing gloves and a hoodie, clearly trying to conceal his identity. Both of them believed they had chosen a safe place, far away from law enforcement eyes. What they didn't know was that agents had been following their every move for months. Their phone calls had been flagged. Their travel routes were mapped. Their associates were being investigated one by one. By the time they arrived at the property, the operation was already at the finishing line. As soon as the two men stepped fully onto property, the quiet trap around them began to close. There were no alarms, no sudden noises, and no dramatic scenes. Federal teams had positioned themselves in such a way that they were able to approach silently, moving with precision and coordination. There was no chase, no standoff, no loud confrontation. It was a calm, controlled takedown, the kind that comes from months of planning and preparation. Within minutes, both suspects were in custody. Neither had the chance to react or attempt escape. Their arrest set off a chain reaction. Over the next days and weeks, investigators launched one of the largest coordinated actions against U.S.-based cartel-linked cells in recent years. The information gathered from the two operatives helped identify dozens of locations connected to the network. Search teams moved quickly to prevent evidence from disappearing. Across multiple states, teams raided homes, apartments, storage units, and even rented garages. They recovered cash, shipping materials, transport logs, communication devices, encrypted notes, and other items that pieced together the internal structure of the U.S. cells. The findings revealed just how widespread the network had quietly become. But something else also became clear during the investigation. These American operatives were not criminal masterminds. They weren't high-ranking cartel members or trained specialists. They were middlemen, people willing to take big risks in exchange for quick money. Some were financially desperate. Some were pulled in by friends or relatives. Others simply underestimated the seriousness of what they were becoming involved in. Most of them did not understand the full scale of the organizations they were assisting. They thought they were handling small jobs, transporting packages, storing items, delivering envelopes. Many didn't realize those jobs tied back to two of the most powerful criminal networks in the world. Their arrests did not destroy the Sinaloa Cartel or CJNG. No single operation could do that. But what this operation did achieve was significant. It severely disrupted the cartel's distribution structure inside the United States. It forced them to rebuild their local networks, change communication methods, and rethink how they operated on American soil. For law enforcement, the operation also proved something important. It showed just how quietly these organizations were embedding themselves within U.S. communities. It showed how much could happen behind closed doors and how easily local people could be recruited into dangerous networks without drawing attention. And most importantly, it showed that small cells, if left unchecked, could grow into much larger threats. Today, agencies remain extremely alert. They continue to monitor suspicious communication lines, unusual rental patterns, and unexplained financial movements. The threat has not vanished, but the strategy has become clearer. Stop the small groups before they evolve into something bigger. In the end, this story isn't about cartel legends, dramatic shootouts, or action movie moments. It's about something far more real: how ordinary Americans, living ordinary lives, became part of a hidden network stretching across multiple states, and how patient, dedicated investigation, built on quiet surveillance and careful planning, brought that network crashing down.